God's chosen ones. 7 signs you're not just called, you're his favorite. They left you without warning. He talked about you like you were cursed. You walked through battles that weren't even yours, but heaven saw everything. That wasn't punishment, that was marking. The reason you felt everything deeper. The reason your prayers hit walls while others thrived. The reason life tried to break you was because God saw something in you the world was never meant to touch. And if you're hearing this message was written in heaven with your name on it, born with the burden of light. Elelliana was only 9 the first time she felt it. It was the week her father died, not suddenly but slowly, like a candle being snuffed out by something unseen. The doctors said cancer, but Elelliana knew it was something deeper. The light behind his eyes, it dimmed weeks before the machines confirmed it. She remembered the night it happened. She had crawled beside his hospice bed at home in Asheville, small enough to still be held, old enough to understand what death meant. Her cheek was resting on his chest when suddenly she heard it. Not a voice, not thunder, but a whisper. A holy whisper that came from nowhere and everywhere all at once. She will carry the light. Elelliana didn't tell anyone. Who would believe her? They were already calling her strange, always too quiet, always too intense, always staring into empty corners as if someone was standing there. But her grandmother, Esther, seemed to know. The night of the funeral, she pulled Elelliana close and kissed her forehead like a seal. They won't understand you, baby, but God does. He put something inside you no one else will see until it starts glowing. And glow she did. She would walk into a room and feel the atmosphere shift. She would wake up at 3 o'clock in the morning, sobbing, but not out of fear. She would say things before they happened. Names would drop into her spirit like pebbles in a still lake. Sometimes people would stop mid-sentence and say, "Wait, how did you know that?" By 13, she'd already learned to stay silent. Because silence, she thought, was safer than suspicion. But deep down, the whisper never stopped. Even as she grew, even as life tried to smother it, through heartbreak, betrayal, shame, even near death, that same still voice would come back, always at night, always when she was on the edge of breaking. You're not breaking, you're becoming. Elelliana never felt like she fit anywhere, not fully. Even in church, people would pull away after she spoke. They'd say she was too spiritual, but she had stopped trying to explain years ago. Because somewhere deep in her spirit, even as she folded laundry or sat in hospital rooms holding hands with the dying, she knew she wasn't made for the crowd. She was made for the calling, and that calling was about to make itself known in ways she couldn't ignore. Chapter 1. The Awakening That Broke You First. It was in the middle of winter when Elelliana realized she had nothing left. No husband, no house, no plan, just a rusted sedan, a folded hoodie for a pillow, and a silence so loud it felt like it echoed through her bones. She didn't cry much anymore, not because she was strong, but because she was empty. You know the kind of empty I'm talking about? The kind that sits in your chest like a locked door. You knock, and God doesn't answer. That night, she pulled into the shadow of an old brick church, parked in the farthest corner. She was too tired to pray, and too afraid to admit she still hoped God was listening. She laid her head on the steering wheel, and in a cracked whisper that barely passed her lips, she said, "I don't know if you see me anymore." Then, the air changed. From the car parked beside hers, empty, engine off, came a voice. Not a scream, not even music, just a single verse playing out loud through invisible speakers. Who dwells in the secret place of the Most High shall abide under the shadow of the Almighty. Elelliana jolted. No one was inside. No lights, no movement. Just that verse, Psalm 91, floating in the cold night air like it had been spoken from heaven's own lungs. She stepped out barefoot, knees trembling, hands shaking, and dropped right there onto the frozen pavement. Not in fear, in awe, because somehow she knew this wasn't a breakdown. This was a beginning. She didn't sleep that night. She wrote instead, page after page, in an old journal she'd stopped carrying. Until now. The pen felt heavy in her hand, like it wasn't hers anymore. She wrote things she didn't even understand. I feel like I'm being stripped of something I never asked to wear. Do I cry when no one's hurt me? God, am I dying or waking up? In the weeks that followed, Elelliana changed. Not visibly. Not in the way the world likes. She still wore the same worn sweater, still worked odd shifts at the night clinic, still smiled politely in grocery lines. But inside, she was unraveling, and it was holy. She couldn't watch the same shows, couldn't sit in the same circles, couldn't pretend that shallow was satisfying. The noise of the world started to feel like static, and beneath it, beneath everything, there was a pull, like God was tugging at a thread in her soul that had been knotted for decades. Most people didn't notice the change. Some did and pulled away. She's acting different, they whispered. She's too intense now, probably just depressed. But Elelliana had learned to stay silent, because there's no point explaining your burning to people who have never even felt a flicker. Then, one afternoon at the soup kitchen where she volunteered, a woman approached her. Old, weathered, wrapped in scarves that smelled like smoke and sanctity. She didn't say hello. She just looked Elelliana in the eyes and said, "He's been peeling the world off you, child, so you can hear him clearly when he speaks." Elelliana froze. Tears rose without permission. No one had spoken to her spirit like that in years. Maybe ever. The woman smiled. "You're not going crazy. You're not too sensitive. You're just waking up." That was the moment it clicked. This wasn't punishment. This wasn't failure. This was what awakening looks like before the light. It was violent, quiet, private, terrifying, and covered in fingerprints from a God who hides in the breaking. Because here's what she came to know. Before God gives you a voice, He teaches you how to sit in silence. Before He gives you sight, He lets you stare into darkness long enough to crave the light. Before He calls you chosen, He makes sure every false identity falls off you like dead skin. And Elelliana, she was shedding everything. But instead of despair, she felt peace. Not the soft kind. The real kind? The kind that only visits people who've already lost it all and found God still sitting beside them. That winter, she died. Not physically, but every version of her that was built on people's approval, performance, and pretending was buried quietly in the cold. And from that grave, a warrior rose, the rejection that made room for oil. There are wounds that don't bleed. They bruise the spirit instead. For Elelliana, rejection didn't come in loud betrayals. It came quietly, in sideways glances, in invitations that never came. Shifted the moment she walked into the room. She had grown used to it, the discomfort people seemed to feel around her. Not because she was rude, not because she demanded attention, but because she carried something they couldn't name. And when people can't name it, they'll often label it wrong. It began in church. You'd think it would be the safest place for someone like her, Someone who prayed more than she slept, someone who wept during worship like it was her only language. But it wasn't. One morning she shared a word she felt in prayer, something gentle, something pure. The pastor smiled, then pulled her aside afterward. "Elelliana," he said, "we appreciate your passion, but you're just a bit too much. Too sensitive, too spiritual, too intense. Too much light for a room that wanted lamps, not fire." She stopped speaking after that, stopped sharing dreams, stopped writing down the verses that came in the middle of the night, stopped trying to explain why she cried when no one else did. Instead, she just listened, and in the silence, something broke open inside her, not with bitterness, but with clarity. "They're not rejecting you," the Spirit whispered one night. "They're rejecting what I put in you that they haven't learned to carry." And that truth healed something shame could not reach. But the rejection didn't stop. People came to her when they were hurting, but disappeared when they healed. They told her she was safe, until her presence revealed things they didn't want to face. Even at work, patients would say, "There's something about you. When you walk in, I feel peace." But her co-workers, they complained she was too quiet, that she made things feel heavy, that she took things too seriously. They didn't understand that the weight she carried wasn't hers. It was oil, an anointing pressed from pain they never saw. One day, an elderly patient, Mrs. Nolan, was dying. Family gone, no visitors. Elelliana sat with her, held her hand for hours. No words, just presence. Right before her final breath, the woman opened her eyes and whispered, "You're not a nurse, child. You're an altar." Elelliana sobbed into her palms, because that's what it had always felt like. She didn't do ministry. She was it. And being it cost her everything. You see, being chosen means being cut. Not to punish you, but to pour you. Rejection was never about removing her worth. It was about making space for something holier, for something heavier. To the oil. Elelliana began to see it then. Every door that closed, every friend that left, every ministry that labeled her too much, was God protecting the sacred flame inside her from the hands of those who would mishandle it. She wasn't overlooked. She was hidden, not forgotten, preserved, because oil doesn't flow unless something's been crushed. And she had been crushed in silence, by loneliness, by misunderstanding, by being the one who knew while others called it imagination. But God had seen it all. He had caught every tear she refused to shed in public. He had written down every night she chose obedience over applause. He had counted every time she stayed when her spirit begged to run. He whispered again, just once, but enough. You were never rejected. You were reserved. That's the moment she stopped asking to be invited in. Because when you're the oil, you don't beg to sit at tables. You had poured over kings, the assignment that wouldn't let you sleep. It started around 3:17, every night. No alarms, no noise, just that pressure on her chest, like someone had whispered her name in the dark. Elelliana would wake up fully alert, heart pounding, mind still. She'd sit up in bed, look around her small apartment. Nothing moved, nothing stirred, but she could feel it, that unmistakable presence. The same one that found her in her car years ago. The one that never needed to shout, because the silence always knew him first. At first, she fought it. She told herself it was anxiety, hormones, maybe too much coffee. She tried melatonin, herbal teas, worship music playing on loop. But the waking continued. 3:17, like clockwork. Like destiny had set a divine alarm only her spirit could hear. One night, she gave in. She didn't reach for her phone. She didn't scroll to distract. She just sat and listened. And in that stillness the whisper came, not with words, but with assignment, a knowing, a burden, a sacred ache she couldn't explain, only carry. You weren't woken up to worry, her spirit heard. You were summoned. She began writing again, not because she wanted to, but because she had to. The words would flood her at night, whole pages of truths she hadn't thought of during the day. Lines like, "Don't be afraid to stand where no one claps. Oil flows where obedience lives. The cost of clarity is always isolation." People began coming to her without asking. Strangers at the bus stop, a single mum in the grocery line, a teen at the clinic who said, "I don't know why I'm telling you this, but I feel like you'll understand." They spoke to her like she was light, like she was safe, like she was sent. It overwhelmed her sometimes, this invisible pull, the way people just found her. They came, broken, confused, craving something they didn't even know how to ask for. And without planning, Elia would speak, sometimes with scripture, sometimes with silence, but always with something she didn't prepare, just opened her mouth and heaven filled it. She confided in a woman named Ruth, a retired hospital chaplain who had mentored her in quiet ways. "Be me?" Elelliana finally asked, tears trembling on her lashes. "Why does he keep waking me up like this? What am I even supposed to do?" Ruth smiled like someone who had carried the same ache. "Because some of us were called to be wells, not fountains. And wells don't run loud, but they never run dry." That hit Elelliana like thunder in her ribs. She'd always wanted clarity, a map, a stage. Instead, God gave her a burden and told her to carry it quietly. She wasn't being punished with insomnia. She was being entrusted with midnight revelation, because some assignments don't come with applause. Some only come with awakening. The more she leaned into the nights, the more she started to notice. The Spirit didn't just show up at 3:17. He had been showing up all along. In the stranger who said, "You look familiar," but couldn't place her. In the dreams that repeated the same verse, Jeremiah 1:5. In the deep sense that if she stayed still long enough, heaven would reveal the next step, just not all of it at once. And Elelliana? She stopped, asking, "Why me?" She started whispering back, "I'm listening because some assignments won't let you sleep. Not because God is cruel, but because destiny doesn't wait for comfort. And if you're honest, you've felt it too, haven't you? That strange urgency, that divine restlessness, that knowing that you are made for more, but you don't have language for it yet. If you have, it's not your imagination, it's your invitation, because the ones God calls in the daylight are trained in the midnight, the sight you didn't ask for." It began slowly, quietly. At first, Elelliana thought she was imagining it, the strange tension she felt when certain people walked into the room, the chill in her spine when someone smiled but something behind their eyes stayed dark. She didn't talk about it. Who would believe her? But she knew, before they spoke, before they acted. She just knew. One afternoon, she was praying for a patient's family in the hospital chapel. A nurse walked by, smiled wide, offered to join hands. The moment their fingers touched, Elelliana's stomach flipped. Her spirit tensed. The smile was sweet, but the spirit behind it wasn't. And suddenly she remembered something her grandmother once said when she was a child. "The eyes can lie, baby, but the spirit always tells the truth." That was when she stopped second-guessing the gift, even though it didn't feel like a gift, more like a burden, to see what others didn't, to sense what others ignored, to be the one who can't unknow what heaven reveals. even if everyone around you still calls it overthinking. She could walk into a room and know who had peace and who was wearing it like a mask, who was silently suffering and who was secretly scheming when something was off, even when nothing looked wrong. And when she tried to tell people, they'd brush it off. You're just sensitive. Stop being so intense. You always read too deep into things. But she wasn't reading too deep. She was seeing too clear. Discernment isn't loud. It doesn't flash like lightning. It whispers in quiet glances. It sighs in the spirit when someone's presence darkens the room just slightly. And Elelliana had the kind of sight that doesn't ask for permission. One day, a little girl at the hospice center, Ivy, maybe 5 years old, tugged at Elelliana's sleeve and said, "Miss Elelliana, you glow." She blinked. "What do you mean?" "Like the moonlight, but warmer." Elelliana smiled gently, hiding the tears that rose, because even children could sense it, especially children. She had spent years trying to dim herself, trying to shrink her sensitivity to fit into places that preferred plastic over prophetic. But there was no hiding it now. She had the sight, and it saw everything. The heartbreak behind laughter, the jealousy behind fake praise, the fear masked as control, the spirits behind behaviors that seemed off. And while others stayed fooled, Elelliana saw truth. Not because she wanted to, but because God had entrusted her with it. But that kind of seeing, it comes with a cost. There were days it felt too heavy. She could barely sit in crowds anymore. The noise behind the noise was deafening. Some people avoided her altogether, as if her eyes could undress the soul. Others came too close, trying to tap into what they didn't understand, hoping to borrow her clarity, and often leaving her drained. Ruth, her mentor, said something that stuck. "Discernment without discipline will destroy your peace." So Elelliana learned to guard it. She didn't tell everyone what she saw. She didn't confront every deception. She stopped offering explanations no one asked for. Because some truths aren't meant to be spoken. Some are meant to be carried, prayed over in secret. And the more she stayed aligned, the clearer her vision became. She could feel when a door was about to close. She knew when someone's yes had a no hiding behind it. She sensed shifts in seasons, long before anyone else felt the wind change. But with all that clarity came this ache. Who can I trust when I see everything? That's when the Spirit whispered again. Not everyone with good intentions carries light, and not every battle you see is yours to fight. So she practiced holy restraint. Let God expose in His time, and let peace protect what insight revealed. Because the chosen don't just walk by faith, they see by it. Diana, she was no longer afraid of her gift, even when it isolated her, even when it made people uncomfortable, even when it meant walking alone. Because once you've seen, you can never pretend to be blind again. Chapter 5. The Weight of Divine Favor. Elelliana never chased titles. She wasn't looking for promotion. All she ever wanted was to serve, quietly, faithfully, without applause. But favor has a way of finding you, especially when you're not performing. It was a Monday morning when the offer came. The hospital chaplain was retiring unexpectedly. The board had noticed Elelliana, her presence, her peace, the way patients seemed to calm just by hearing her voice. La resume, Bill campaign, just a whisper through back channels. The woman, she's different. And they were right, but not in the way they thought. The offer was more than a role, it was a platform. Microphone for her obedience, an invitation into deeper responsibility. And right as she said yes, All hell broke loose. Her car broke down the next morning. The night after that, a wave of anxiety hit her chest so hard she thought it was a heart attack. Her sleep vanished, her phone glitched. People she trusted turned cold overnight. And yet, in the midst of the storm, her peace deepened. It wasn't logical, but it was holy, because favor doesn't come alone. It's shadowed by warfare. She remembered what Ruth once told her. The oil will elevate you, yes, but it will also expose you to honor and to hatred, because light makes everything visible. And when you carry favor, especially divine favor, you become a mirror. Some will see God in you and draw closer. Others will see what they've buried and run. One evening, she slipped into the hospital chapel, empty, dimly lit. Her knees touched the floor before her lips did. "God," she whispered, trembling, "but didn't ask for this. Why does your hand feel so heavy?" Then she felt it, a warmth behind her. She turned. A stranger stood at the back of the chapel. Older man, faded clothes, tears on his cheeks. "I don't know who you are," he said, "but you're the reason I didn't end my life last night." Silence. Then he added, "You carry something I haven't felt since my mother prayed over me when I was a boy." Elelliana wept, because she understood in that moment this wasn't her gift. It was God's presence, resting on her obedience, not because she was flawless, but because she had stayed. When others ran, when it was dark, when it hurt, she stayed, and God favored that. But let's be honest, favor doesn't always feel like blessings. Sometimes it feels like pressure. You walk in rooms and feel the spiritual atmosphere shift. You speak and people listen, even when you're unsure. You pray and things move, but your own heart feels heavy. That's what Elelliana carried. The responsibility of being chosen. The demand of being anointed. People assumed her life was peaceful because she looked composed. They didn't see the battles she fought just to get out of bed. They didn't feel the warfare that wrapped itself around her every time she stepped into new territory. Because the enemy doesn't fight the average. He fights the anointed. And yet she kept rising, not by her strength, but by grace. She learned to fight in prayer, to rest in worship, to lean on the God who called her, even when she felt crushed beneath his purpose. Because the favor wasn't on her for show. It was in her for service. So if you felt this too, if doors open but the weight nearly breaks you, if people are drawn to you, but you go home drained, if you're promoted but privately attacked, then know this. You're not being punished. You're being positioned. The warfare isn't proof you're off course. It's proof you're dangerous to darkness. And Elelliana? She didn't run from it anymore. She carried it like oil in a jar, sacred and silent. Because favor may feel heavy, but it's only because it carries glory, the light you can't hide anymore. It's strange how quietly heaven moves. You think the fire will fall in public, but most of the time it starts in a silent room with a tired woman holding her chest, whispering, "I can't carry this anymore." And that's when the light expands, not from striving, not from perfection, but from surrender. Elelliana still wakes at 3:17. I am in, not every night, but often enough to know the summons isn't over. She no longer wrestles with it. She rises, lights a candle, opens her hands, and says just one thing. I'm still yours. People still don't understand her. Some still leave. Opportunities still come, wrapped in resistance. But she's not shaken now, because something shifted in her bones. She no longer needs the world to see her. Heaven does. She doesn't fear being misunderstood. The anointing explained her before she could speak. And she doesn't flinch when warfare comes. It only comes for the ones who carry something eternal. So maybe this isn't just Elelliana's story. Maybe it's yours too. Maybe you've been waking up with a burden you can't explain. Maybe people have left without cause. Maybe you've walked into rooms and felt spiritual resistance, even while smiling. Maybe your life doesn't look blessed, but you know God's hand is all over it. If that's you, listen carefully. You are not broken. You are branded. You are not behind. You are being built in silence. You are not forgotten. You are favored, not because of what you've done, but because of who you are. Chosen. Maybe God didn't choose you to be seen by crowds. Maybe He chose you to be sustained in secret. Are you sure you're not one of the chosen, just because your journey came with more battles than blessings? Because maybe, just maybe, the reason it's been so heavy, so lonely, so strange, so sacred, is because you carry something heaven didn't trust with just anyone. If this story stirred something in your spirit, if you feel like Elelliana's battles mirrored your own, comment, "I was marked in silence." Let the Spirit bear witness. Subscribe for the next story, because the next one goes deeper. We're about to uncover what your hidden season was truly preparing you for. This isn't entertainment. This is your confirmation. You're not just surviving, you're rising. And no matter what came against you, God already declared the victory.